Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, this is Annie Rogers with Attitude Magazine, and I'm here introducing a topic of pretty dire importance to many families living in quarantine today, alongside ADHD and comorbid conditions, namely depression and mood disorder. Social distancing feels an awful lot like social isolation for many of us. And though our teens are connected through Xbox and Instagram, Discord, and text messages, they are social creatures, and the physical distance from their friends is quickly becoming a serious emotional and psychological strain. Not to mention the anxiety associated with coronavirus fears, a lot of heightened emotions. So if your teenager with ADHD has, like so many do, a comorbid condition like depression, then you may be worried about their exaggerated emotions, their anxiety, their social isolation, all pushing, maybe an existing mood disorder into dangerous territory. So here to speak with us today about this topic is Wes Crenshaw, Ph.D. He's a licensed psychologist, board certified in couples and family psychology. He owns a private practice, Family Psychological Services, in the greater Kansas City area, and is author of the book, I Always Want to Be Where I'm Not, Successful Living with ADD and ADHD. This is our second in a series of conversations with Dr. Crenshaw, and we'll be focusing actually on the content from his forthcoming book, which is called ADD and Zombies, Fearless Medication Management for ADD and ADHD, which is available for pre-order and as an ebook if you visit familypsychological.com. The paper and hardcover versions will be out around June 15th. So we wanted to speak with you today, Dr. Crenshaw, about this very important topic of teenagers with ADHD and comorbid depression and the impact of the coronavirus, specifically, social isolation and anxiety around that, and the concerns that you're hearing from your clients, and some advice for parents who aren't sure what to look for, aren't sure exactly what to do to keep their kids safe in a different way during this crisis.
Good to be here, Annie.
Yes, thanks for coming.
So what we're seeing is, of course, both expectable and, kind of disturbing. To sort of begin with, the co-occurrence, and we have a whole 2 chapters in the book on co-occurring disorders because it's so important, and because the book is about medication management, very little will dictate the way medication is managed more than the associating disorders that can go along with it. And so it's not unusual to see this. And in fact, I've said in both of the books, if you have ADD and you're not depressed, you probably don't understand your situation very well. Because just beginning with the idea that feeling kind of out of sync with other people, not being able to keep up, it just seems like other people do things that are just so effortlessly. And folks with ADD feel like it's at best laborious and at times impossible, whether that's studying or relationships or working in the world. Any of these things just seem so much harder, and that's depressing. So one of the things, and I always want to be where I'm not, I have a whole chapter on organization, and it's not really just about finding your socks, which actually is kind of nice to know where your socks are. But it's also about how your life is organized. And I actually posited in there that the theory of happiness, or the secret of happiness, I sound like a guru there, don't I? Bringing you the secret of happiness. It is simply how you organize your life. You build a life in a way that generates meaning to you. And that can be hard, not just the lost sock problem, but in having the right people and the right schooling and the right career and the right family relationships all kind of intermixed. Well, some of us take that for granted. That's just how things work. For folks with ADD, managing all of that can be really hard. So guess what? Here we come in a world that was working a certain way that may have been, difficult to navigate, but we kind of knew what was going to happen. And along comes COVID and just derails it all. And so people no longer have any structure. I don't remember if I said the last time, but one of the first things a teenager said to me during the COVID era was she came and plopped herself down and said, "I think I do better with a little structure." And she's right. And so for folks with ADD, that when the structure disappears, a lot of the scaffolds that hold up that sense of organization and that idea of happiness that comes with organization, believe it or not, those things disintegrate, and we're seeing it leave people of all ages, and especially young people, college students, high school students, just literally staring blankly. I've spoken with people in the last 2 weeks who are just staring blankly, trying to figure out, what am I going to do? That can really trigger depression if it hasn't already been there, or exacerbated if it has.
Right. It's a void created in our lives that may be filled with something quite toxic, for lack of better alternatives. And I guess that's the question is, what can we do to help, ourselves, but also our teenagers, who are feeling untethered, confused, and like they're unsure what's happened to their happiness. How can we reasonably help them in this environment? And what should we be maybe looking out for, that are signs that something serious is going on?
Yeah. So you raise several good points there. First of all, of course, parents are going through their own emotional reactivity right now. Maybe they are on limited work schedules or having to go on unemployment. My gosh, I saw a picture of a line of people on the TV lining up in cars to get unemployment checks. That too is very depressing. And so sometimes parents are bringing in a difficult frame of mind to the whole situation. So be aware of, first thing is to be aware of yourself, be aware of what's happening for you, and to try, to the extent possible, not to just let that boil over onto your kids who are stressed and down right now themselves. So the second thing to do is to, when I say this thing about organization, a lot of parents, and I was a little surprised how quickly this happened, a lot of parents jumped up to this idea of trying to get their kids on a schedule. Well, of course that makes sense. It's certainly in a sleep-wake schedule. We had too many kids that get out of the school routine and sleep till noon and stay up till 2 a.m. So I certainly, in general, would say that is something to work against in trying to keep people sleep regulated. But then some parents have added to that, a 40-point list of chores to do during the day. And boy, I have some shocking news for you, Annie. Doing chores is not actually a cure for depression. We used to think it was. You would have people, living at the state hospitals many years ago, and having daily tasks and work was seen as very therapeutic. It's certainly better than laying around, but that's not really what I mean by organizing your life. It's getting things into your life that bring joy and meaning. Now, for example, I'll toss a few out. There's a list of hundreds, but it has to match your kid. I've been very surprised how many kids I'm working with are suddenly into painting. I did not know they were into painting, and that they have gotten out the art supplies. My gosh, one of my kids last night, who we just diagnosed him with ADHD this week, but I've seen him for a while. We've been doing some working on the depression for a while, actually. and he did 6 canvases last week. So that's a great therapeutic. Put that on your kids' list of activities, or something that is similar to that, whether it's exercise or walking. And I will go back and say something I said the other day. I've said it in a lot of interviews recently. We've got to figure out a way for kids to have social interactions that are safe. I think I alluded to this in a previous discussion, but I have confirmed that a good percentage of the young people, including young adults, 21 or 2 years old, that I see are thwarting a lot of parental authority right now, because the parent are saying you can't talk to anybody, so they're just sneaking out. And that's not social distancing, friends. Some of those kids are actually keeping distance from their friends while they're sneaking out, others less so. So we've got to really work with our kids. They need that to maintain their mental health. On our list of treatment plan objectives for adults and kids is social support, interpersonal relationships. We work a lot to help people get over depression, as well as to mitigate effects of ADD by having good social interactions. And if that disappears, it is even in the introverted people, you're going to have depression, because the introverted people have their 1 or 2 friends that are very important to them. They don't want to go out and have a party every night. They just want their 1 or 2 friends. And if they get taken down to 0 friends, that's going to be rough. And then I love it when the mom shows up. Moms who are listening, don't do this. The mom shows up and says, well, we can just be friends, or all you really need is your family. That's just, it's not developmentally appropriate when you're 15. That's not what they need right now.
Right. Even if your intentions are good, that's going to fall like a lead balloon, and
exactly
maybe be counterproductive for your family happiness.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned, when you said social interactions, good social interactions. I think we've all read about the possible detriments psychologically to social media use. Is that a concern, that kids who are seeking that, social fix may be actually exacerbating their symptoms by spending more time on social media than they may already, which was probably a lot?
Yeah, this isn't a good time to try and make changes on that unless there's some very clear problem, like your kid is bullying other kids. I drop the hammer on that in a minute. But for kids, this is now perhaps their only way of consistent social interaction. What's been funny to me is, and I've said it over the years, I had a newspaper column, I've done public radio and TV for years on subjects like this, that all of the conduits that kids use, whether it was texting or Snapchat or Instagram, all of these things were not sufficient. People thought, they don't even talk to each other anymore. They don't have any real relationships. I always said that's just not true. These are conduits that really improve social interaction. That's been proven true by the fact that kids aren't satisfied right now to just have a Snapchat relationship. That may be all they can accomplish safely, or that their parents' rule is that. But we're finding that actually is making them feel lonely, because they can't do a Snapchat and say, let's get together and go out to the lake or something, or go to the park. That, or, all the other things, pros and cons that kids do. So we're really seeing the limits of social media in this situation, and kids are going to get bored with TikToks, believe it or not.
Right. So parents shouldn't assume that because your child maybe is gaming with friends on the Xbox, or TikToking incessantly, that they are feeding their social needs adequately.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like I said, that's why I wouldn't limit it. Now, by not limiting it, I don't mean they should have it up all night. I'm a huge believer that all electronic devices have to go off about an hour before sleep time, because they either produce a lot of light or a lot of psychological excitement. And in managing depression, getting sleep right on a regular schedule and not staying up late is vitally important. Now, teenagers have a different circadian rhythm than anyone else. They do tend to be later. Schools that have delayed the start until 9:30 or 9 o'clock or 9:30, I mean, way prior to COVID, have actually done better with kids being able to focus and attend, because their circadian rhythms are later. But that becomes quickly a excuse. The kid says, well, my circadian rhythm, I just need to go to bed at 3:30 in the morning. I'm pretty sure that's me. And that we know is not good, because that doesn't sync with the rest of the world, and it will end up with a greater fatigue and sleep deficit that just adds to the sense of depression.
Got it. So it's goes back to the importance of the schedule as a sort of grounding mechanism, and one that, I mean, any parent of a teenager knows they're not necessarily begging for any schedule of any kind, but probably deep down they know, like your client recently, that they actually do better with that reliable day in and day out. So an important tool for parents to use. And would you recommend, you've also said before that, parents shouldn't set 10 rules and a set schedule with half an hour increments, but rather work with their teenager on a solution that they can
Definitely.
stick to.
Definitely. So when you're talking about situations that a person's depressed, it to feel that there is an authoritarian structure over you is not very enchanting. That doesn't improve the person's sense of happiness and well-being. And so part of the things I would schedule in, for example, are here's your gaming time. Make sure that's on the schedule. Here, and you may need to set gaming time to occur only if homework time is completed. You can have that contingency in there. But to try to really be flexible and supportive, and make sure there are things in there that are jogging time. And if you're going along with my idea of having appropriate distance social time, set those things into the schedule so that your kid can look forward to something. One of the values, we think about scheduling, oh my gosh, somebody's marching me down a road I don't want to go. It doesn't have to be that way at all. You can have on a schedule when you get to look forward to something very meaningful, then your hopefulness goes up. I have a client whose family is finally kind of working out an arrangement in the next couple of weeks where this is an adult, where she can fly out to see her boyfriend. And she just lives every day on the hope, on the joy of the thought of being able to go see him. And he is in the same way. He's about halfway across the country. That having something to hope for, to look forward to, whether it's on a daily basis or next week, makes really all the difference. And right now, what I hear from a lot of young people is they say verbally to me, I have nothing to look forward to. And I'm like, well, you'll probably be back in school in the fall. And they either say, you don't know that, which they're right. I don't know that. We don't know what's going to happen in the fall. Or they say, the fall, Wes, that's like 5 years from now. That's what it feels like to them. So they have to have something sooner that is important to them. And as I said, vacuuming is not going to be probably on that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of goes back to your first point that keeping busy for the sake of keeping busy is not the antidote, but perhaps finding a purpose that boost your happiness, and staying busy with that. So it might be helping your teen open up to the possibility of enjoying painting again, or I guess that's the tightrope, right? That whatever parents suggest are probably not going to be embraced right out of the box.
Most of my painting people came up with that one on their own. And so you're right. I don't know if the parent had said, "Oh, wouldn't you like to start oil painting?" If the kid would have said, "That's crazy, no way," I don't know. But if your child says, I'm going to practice gymnastics in the front yard, I would probably go find a mat. I'd probably try to figure out, a gymnastics mat's pretty big, so that might be quite a chore. But I'd probably try to find some way to facilitate that. I don't think I would say, let's go get a trampoline so you can jump on them, unless that's something that was really meaningful to the kid. By the way, one of my kids has a trampoline, and that's about saved her life. So who would have thought? But for her, emotionally, that's just very meaningful.
Got it.
So have that knowledge and work with the kid around what's meaningful to them and structure that. That's really the way to handle a lot of this stuff. Doesn't mean they shouldn't do other things, but if we're talking particularly about managing, reducing depression, we have to talk about what's called behavioral activations. And these are all examples we just talked about.
Okay. And your comment also brought up a good point, which was the value of a third-party perspective and strategies. So where teens may not embrace suggestions from their parents, they will listen to you. Is this a good time for families to consider some outside resources for bringing in some help?
Definitely, it is. And I think I get a little confused sometimes. I think it's the summer issue of Attitude that I have an article in there about engaging kids in treatment. And I'll only tease it a little bit, but I talk about the differences. I wrote the article, and the more I wrote it, the more I realized what it really was becoming about was how different it is to treat boys and girls. And it's like night and day. And engaging them, how you get them involved in the treatment. And but the upshot of all of that writing is now is really, it always should be a time, if you have a kid with ADD, that they have a therapist to talk to. I have kids that I see once every 2 or 3 months at this point. That's not usually how we started out, but we're down to the point where I see them once every 2 or 3 months. And I see kids I see about every other week. We're busy enough around here. We don't really see people on a weekly basis, but once in a great while, I'll see somebody weekly. And this gives them an outlet to come in and deal with whatever they're dealing with. And kids, if they are introduced to that and are comfortable with the therapist, which is largely the therapist's job, will use that. And if that's not something listeners are doing right now, I strongly urge them to take a crack at it if their insurance benefits are allowing. There are many companies, many Blue Cross companies, especially across the country, that are allowing a cost-free telehealth benefit right now. Our state one is, and I know Anthem is in some states, and quite a few Blue Crosses are. This was a real gift for them. I think they are trying to contain coronavirus because it's expensive to them if they don't. But it's also just a real help for people who are struggling with a lot of the issues you and I are talking about right now. So there may be telehealth benefits that allow you not even to have to come into the office. We do this a lot. I certainly prefer to do it with people I know, but we are starting to do some intakes with people this way. So
okay. That was my
highly
next
recommend
question,
it. Yeah.
That if you're brand new, under ideal circumstances, you would have face-to-face time together to build a relationship, but everything is upside down. So in this case, it does sound like more and more therapists are, as you said, being flexible. and
And the
supportive.
clients have to be flexible too. Though I will say, having done this quite a bit, and I did it a lot with college students too before this, but you end up having as a therapist to be a lot more entertaining in your little box, little TV box than you would normally have to be. So engagement is critical in real life. It's even more so in video.
Mm. So that is an excellent tool for parents to keep in mind, that they really are not, they sure feel it, but they're not actually alone.
Yeah. And I think a part of that, also our office and a lot of other providers are doing telemedicine. And we've had to shift to that, under the gun here recently. But we had been experimenting with that some also, and being able to do prescribing by distance. I was going to call it distance learning, but that's not quite what it is. Distance prescribing has really been an improvement for people in rural areas or places where there just isn't much psychiatric time, which is a lot of places. We talk in the book about how limited psychiatric services really are for clients. And I would say that if you have a kid who's really struggling with depression, all these behavioral things you and I talked about are critical. Also, diet, exposure to light, all of these things are important. But medication management can be literally and figuratively a lifesaver for kids. We have many kids who've done very well with certain antidepressant agents. We talk a lot about that in the book when it comes out. But sometimes that's hard for parents to hear. Maybe they're okay with stimulants. They're like, yeah, they're doing good in school. But the idea that the child might need to have an antidepressant added to that can be hard. And if ever there was a time when you really need a good prescriber with whom you have a very meaningful relationship, it's when you start doing polypharmacology, when you start doing multiple medications. And this is one of the reasons at our office, and we recommend in the book, that people have a therapist and a prescriber always talking to each other, having them either in the same office or in a collegial relationship, because tuning that in for anyone, especially a teenager, when there's depression and ADD co-occurring, is a art and a science, and it's fabulous when it works. But too often that team is not there to really do that. So that would be a major suggestion I would have for parents when they are seeing this with their kids.
And for those parents who the kids do not yet have a diagnosis of depression or mood disorder, but they suspect that is the case, is it possible for them to get a diagnosis and to seek treatment help right now in the midst of coronavirus?
Yeah, that is a good question. If your provider is technologically savvy, the answer is, yeah, this is a great time to do that, because so much of the involvement, the interchange around getting diagnosis is questions and answers and filling out forms. Now, the system we use, and we use the Connors, which is now distributed by MHS, and they just redid their interface. It was a bit of a rocky process, but they have a pretty good interface now that's all remote access. So we set up the testing and can send it anywhere in the world for people to fill out. So you may have a teacher that knows you well in Austin, Texas, or whatever, and that person can serve as one of the observers. Send it to a parent in Albany, New York, and they can fill it out. So then that all comes back, and we're using Zoom, as you and I are right now. So I can click share the screen, and I and the client, I just did it last night, I and the client family can look at the screens together and go over the forms as if they were sitting in my office. So once the book comes out, Kelsey and I are actually, my nurse practitioner who co-authors with me, are going to actually be doing consults. We may not be opening clinical cases, but we're going to be doing consults for people to help them find a better diagnosis, because we have a whole process for that. So that is absolutely doable, and we're not the only ones who are able to do that.
I think that's so important for parents to hear right now, because so many feel that they really are alone and sort of, they're up a creek with no paddles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
Scary,
true.
very scary. Yeah.
Well, and I think what we're seeing too, and I believe I mentioned this, the list of questions we were going over last time. So if folks are finding that they're having a harder time with their boys than their girls, I'm sure they are right, because we have a lot harder time in situations like this motivating boys to really get their schoolwork done or stay active than we do with girls. Just a different cultural paradigm.
Now, you mentioned a concept, I'm not sure if these are related, but that may be contributing, and that is sort of learned helplessness.
Yeah. If you look back, listeners who had intro to psychology, you will undoubtedly remember this awful experiment where this is back before we were nice to animals, and they would take the dog and put it in a box and strap it down and shock it. Now, I don't mean like an electric chair, just enough to be upsetting to the dog. And the dog would try to jump out of the box because, who wants to get an electrical shock? And the dog could get out of the box and because it was strapped in. And so eventually the dog just gave up. It just laid there and took the shocks because it knew there was no hope of relieving the shock. That is really, so that's called learned helplessness. And that's really what I see a lot of young people feeling. They wake up in the morning and they think, oh, I got to get out of bed. No, I don't. And they kind of lay there all day. This is one of the first signs of depression, is a loss of interest in activities that you previously enjoyed. Well, if you can't do those things, if you're strapped in a box of COVID, then it isn't like your depression came on you naturally. Like you felt no longer interested in your activities or your friends or doing things that are meaningful in your life, those organizational tasks. It's that was forced. We're forced not to do them. And I think this idea is we're probably not talking about it enough, is kids then become hopeless and helpless, as do adults, when they just can't resist anymore. There's no way to fix this. They can't sneak out. I think the kids I'm almost scared to say this. Some of the kids who've been sneaking out seem to be way more mentally healthy right now than the kids who've surrendered, for reasons the example should clarify. They are taking action, maybe unwise action, but they are taking an action. They're doing something. They are active. I hope they don't bring COVID home to everybody. They ought to think about that probably. But they are probably mitigating some of those depressions. So what we need to do is figure out how to help kids do behavioral activations that aren't dangerous to them, but get up and do things.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful concept.
I warned you this would be a depressing discussion. I can hear it in your sighs.
Well, like many others, I'm thinking of the fact that we don't know exactly when this tunnel will end, and we will see daylight again. So it seems to me that these strategies are ones that if we don't need them yet, we likely will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the mistakes people are making in their attempt to find that light at the end of the tunnel is telling kids, they say, well, you can't see your boyfriend, you can't see your girlfriend. And they're like, oh my God, how do you expect me to live through this? And they say, well, it's only for another week. No, please don't tell people that. And they'll say this thing about the peak day that we keep hearing. This for our state, that's supposed to be somewhere between the 19th of April and the 29th. That doesn't mean that on the 30th of April, everybody can run out and kiss their partner or hug their friends. That means we're now hopefully going to flatten out and slowly start reducing the number of cases and deaths till we get to a point where there isn't a lot of contagion out there. That well could take into the end of May, into June, some are estimating July. So the idea of asking your child to have no emotional, physical, presently in the real world relationships with any of their friends until June or July puts a different spin on their mental health and their ability to maintain it during this time. So we need to have realistic understandings of what we're up against and work on finding some appropriate, safe methods of interrelating, or else we're just going to all be doing it naughty style, which we've seen plenty of.
Mm-hmm. Right. The sneaking out and yeah. So I guess before we wrap up on this topic, you mentioned, I think what's really important is the sign that your child may be struggling with depression, a loss of interest in activities that they would otherwise enjoy. Are there any other signs that you feel parents should be on the lookout for, keeping in mind everyone's on edge these days? So it may be tougher to pick it out than it normally would.
Yeah, there are other signs. Certainly the sleep problem. And, the problem with every one of these signs is, again, COVID is driving us in this direction anyhow. So stating the experience of feeling depressed, listen to that. You can ask your kid, how are you feeling? And the kid's like, I don't know. And you're like, you're starting to get depressed. And the kid will say, well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Having that conversation opens some doors. The sullenness, irritability in teenagers, depression often expresses itself as irritability. Now, listeners are like, well, my kid's irritable all the time. Yes, I am aware of that. But this may be a change towards more irritability. Each of those things sort of plays itself out. Agitations, being shorter tempered, all of those. And if kids have, parents aren't often privy to this, but if kids have a proclivity to use substances, usually substance use will increase. Marijuana use, to some extent, drinking, these will increase when a person becomes depressed. And of course, here's another tricky one, appetite. Appetite may go up or down. If kids are on stimulants, of course, that's always mitigated by stimulant use. So it's a little hard to tell sometimes on that. But if the child's appetite goes in one direction or the other in the last week or two, then that's probably another possible sign. But the best sign is having a conversation with your kid and getting their input. Very rarely do kids not know anymore that they are experiencing depression.
Got it. And so essentially it's for the parents to also resist perhaps their own sense of learned helplessness in dealing with their kids. We've heard it and we understand just how overwhelming life is right now, and parents who have a teenager essentially living in their bedroom and trying to keep them safe, perhaps thinking that, hey, at least they're home. I may not see them. I may not talk to them. They may not want to exchange any pleasantries with me, but at least they're here. Probably that's not a good outcome. They need to engage with their teenager. Yeah.
Well, you make such a good point, because this idea that kids are safe, and I've heard people say these words, if they're safe because they're here at home with us, they might or might not be safe from COVID. I also know people who are still going to work and could be bringing it home, but they are definitely not more safe in that situation from mental illness, from mental health problems. They're not that. If anything, that increases it, because that's not, quote unquote, normal for teenagers to be in that environment. So, as long as this needs to happen, we need to be really on top of those kind of issues. And if one of the most unfortunate things we see around here, and we see it with some frequency, I have 7 staff that work for me. We see it with some frequency, is parents who, for maybe good reasons, maybe not, put off seeking services for their kids and end up with a kid in the emergency room. Now, that very rarely is the person in active suicidal behavior, but they may be making those statements or ideations. And, we have this sort of old cliche of the cry for help. That's a real thing. I will have kids come in and I will say, so what's up with your, I got you as a referral from the ER. What's up with that? And the kid will say, no one was listening. I would be like, Mom, I need to see a therapist. Mom, hey, Mom. And Mom's like, yeah, I'll get around to that. And so finally, I just decided I can't take this anymore. And some people hear that as kind of manipulative, but teenagers who are, quote, manipulating are usually teenagers who are trying to get a need met. And nowhere is that truer than when you see somebody send themselves to the ER or start cutting or doing something that is designed to try to access services. This is a great time to not let things go that far. Your kid isn't in school. It's easier to get in to see the therapist during the day. All sorts of variables have become available to us that make it easier to get services right now. And, therapists are standing by to be helpful. There's usually a pretty good base of providers in most communities. Now, how to get your insurance to line up with all of that, that's a whole other show. We have a chapter on that in the book too.
Okay, that's fair. But I think this is an important ending message that just because the whole world is feeling stress and anxiety, that doesn't mean that your child's stress and anxiety should be shrugged off, ignored, or written off as an over-exaggerated response to social isolation. That you should take it seriously and listen to what your child is telling you.
And ask. If they're not volunteering, be sure to ask.
Right.
That is a good place to end. That's a good place for people to a good takeaway for folks.
Wonderful. Well, I think we might have introduced more questions than we answered, but this was still very, very helpful and insightful. And I'm sure that our readers will find it so. And so we hope that this is just another in a series of conversations. But I do want to remind everyone before we go that there is even more information, background, and much deeper on the topic of treatment in the forthcoming book that we mentioned, ADD and Zombies, Fearless Medication Management for ADD and ADHD. If you visit FamilyPsychological.com, you can, I believe, order the ebook now and also pre-order the paper hardcover and paper version, as well as the audiobook, which will be available in June. We hope that we're all sprung free by then, but perhaps not. So
we're going to have to write another one called ADD and COVID.
Yeah.
Whole book there in there.
Right.
And my parting shot would be, you're right. We raise more questions than answers, and that is as it should be, because that we want parents to be questioners. I think that's a good point.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Crenshaw, for your time and insights. As always, we appreciate your contributions to Attitude, and we look forward to speaking again soon.
Take care, Annie.
Okay, thank you.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.